We'll give everybody a few seconds to log in, join the webinar, get settled. Very excited to see you all today. Great to see so many people joining. Well, I'm going to kick us off for today's conversation. So welcome everybody, and thank you again for joining us for the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative's March Community Forum. As you probably know, our topic today is Women Investing in Women, Pioneers in the Catholic Impact Investing Space. My name is Maggie Stoller, and I am the Associate Director at the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative, also known as CIIC or CIIC. We are very excited to have so many participants today, and I just want to thank each of you for joining the conversation. So at the top of this webinar, I just want to start with a brief prayer, a few seconds for us to really place what we carry in our hearts, burdens, and joys in the hands of God. And for our opening prayer today, I will be reading two prayers originally shared by Xavier University and the Solidarity Garden for Women's History Month. Both of these prayers have been adapted for today's webinar. So join me in praying. Dear God, Spirit of renewal, we turn this month to reflect on the stories, the heritage, and the struggles of the women throughout the ages. We seek to learn from all those voices that have been left unheard. May we find who has been left out and craft new ways of inclusion for every week and every month. May this spiritual practice bring out the voices of all those struggling, all those left apart. May this month of reflection teach us to search for those stories that are different from our own. Mother of possibility in the finding, may we come to know ourselves changed, renewed where we are dry, hope where we are lost, and open where we are shut. We thank you, Lord, for the unprecedented development in the field of education for girls and women all over the world. It is indeed your blessings that we can find women of such great courage and initiative around us. Thanks to you and women's efforts that they are not only emerging as entrepreneurs, but also have a greater say over the way money is being utilized. Lord of love and hope, we also know how many girls and women still have to face challenges in society today, just so that they get an equal say in their community. We pray to you that life changes for all these women and that they live with men, girls, and boys together as equals. Thank you for all the cherished women in our lives and in our histories, mothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors. God, may women across the globe continue to be empowered, knowing the love that you offer. Amen. Thank you, everyone. So for those that are unfamiliar with the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative, we are a convener of a network of investors that want to accelerate the transformation towards a solidarity economy at the service of people and planet. In our CIIC Trusted Impact Investing community, learnings lead to action in allocating capital for a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. We offer a membership program for asset owners with access to a dedicated private community platform, a deal sharing dashboard, and pitch sessions with peer recommended and vetted investing opportunities. We also offer the Catholic Impact Investing Pledge to encourage organizations to move beyond avoiding harmful investments and proactively make commitments to measurable impact investments. Before we dive in, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to use the chat box below to introduce yourselves, let us know where you're joining from, and to interact with each other and with the speakers. If you have any questions or comments for the speakers, please make sure to drop them in the Q&A area, and we will do our best to respond live or follow up after the webinar. Feel free to upvote any questions that you see by liking them. A reminder that this webinar is also being recorded, and we will send you the link of the recording in the next day or so. And now I am very excited to introduce our webinar facilitator, Jessica Cook. Jessica is the Managing Director of Business Development at Ascension Investment Management and co-chairs CIIC's Participation and Outreach Committee, in addition to serving on CIIC's Advisory Board. Please join me in welcoming Jessica. Oh, Jessica, I think you're muted.
Why do I do this? Sorry, I should have learned this after a few years. So thank you, Maggie, again. I am so excited to be and honored to be a part of this conversation. March is Women's History Month, commemorating and encouraging the study and observance and celebration of the vital role of women in American history. Since the 1970s, women religious congregations have been leaders in making direct, community-centered investments in causes that are important to them, decades before the definition of impact investing even existed. This panel discussion is going to showcase women in the Catholic impact investing space, both asset owners and asset managers, who have been champions in gender equity and gender lens investing, and really highlight how female leadership contributes to social impact and strong investment performance. And we're going to hear from two Catholic asset owners, Sister Teresa George, representing the Daughters of Charity of Province of St. Louise, and Sarah Smith from Mercy Investment Services, as well as Sonia Kowal with Zevin Asset Management. But before I introduce our first speaker, I really want to acknowledge and show respect to a woman that dedicated her life to righting wrongs and giving a voice to injustice. Last year, our CIIC community and the world lost a true friend and champion, Sister Pat Daly. Sister Pat, a woman of deep faith and true compassion, was known to so many within the Dominican family and around the world as a fierce champion for social and climate justice via responsible investment. It was not hard at all to find an abundance of quotes about her work and her depth of character that I felt deserved to be shared with this community. After that, I'm going to pause for a moment of silent prayer and reflection and contemplation for Sister Pat. Sister Pat was a petite, powerful giant fighting for corporate social responsibility before most of us even knew how important such work was then and remains to be now. She lives on in hundreds of engagements now happening worldwide every day between investors and corporations on behalf of social justice and environmental sustainability. Sister Pat translates belief into commitment and never backs down from a fight. She lived in hope. We never talked about winning or losing. It was about raising consciousness and educating. If we're not asking these questions, who will? A true trailblazer and faithful servant of God in the marginalized. Sister Pat was indeed a force, and she will be greatly missed. So please, let's remember and give thanks to Sister Pat with this moment of silence. Okay, thank you so much. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sister Teresa George, who I think she's been such an inspirational leader and woman in my life. It is really an honor to have this conversation with her. Sister Teresa currently serves as Provincial Treasurer and Provincial Councillor for the Daughters of Charity here in St. Louis. As Treasurer, Sister Teresa chairs the Investment Committee for the province and leads her province's commitment to Catholic value-based investing, impact investment, shareholder advocacy. With a background in financial management and hospital administration, Sister Teresa strives to couple her commitment to faithful stewardship with administrative competency to achieve financial performance that will support the life and ministry of her community for the long term. So please join me in welcoming Sister Teresa.
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. I'm unmuted, right?
What? Yeah, you're unmuted, right? I can hear you. You did better than I did. So given we've had such a good relationship and long relationship together, I thought I would just maybe ask you a few questions and we could have a little bit of a dialogue.
That'd be great.
Okay, perfect. So women religious congregations have been investing directly in communities and causes that have been most important to them, even starting back with CDFIs in the 1970s. Can you speak to the history of these investments and how your institution has contributed to the evolved in your thinking beyond loan vehicles and into different kinds of private market investments?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to do a shout out. Daughters of Charity are an international community. We're in something like 98 countries around the world, or excuse me, 68 countries, 98 provinces around the world. And I know at least one of my sisters from Scotland is on. Hi, Teresa. The reason I want to mention that is because the daughters are serving at grassroots level. Many of the communities that our investments are trying to impact, even going back to the earliest microfinancing done through CDFIs and other types of loan vehicles. Our sisters are on the grassroots level, working with the women who are suffering from the poverty that exists because of discriminatory practices and biases between what becomes available to men and what becomes available to women. And so serving around the world, they have seen the way that gender has impacted women so that they're living in dire circumstances. And we've committed from a service perspective to focus on helping to advance and empower women so that they can become a little bit more in control of their own destiny. Yet they still suffer worldwide from a disparity in access to funding, access to loans, and these vehicles such as the community development loans, the microfinancing, is really focused to help women in those communities that we're serving. And I think it has made a difference. But I think something for me, Jess, that I heard when I went to, when I had heard that I was going to be treasurer back in 2015, I was invited to go to one of the earliest conferences that they were having in the Vatican for impact investing. And I didn't know a whole lot about what our provincial practices were around investment, and certainly didn't know about impact. But I went to this conference in Rome and was blown away by the idea that not only could we invest and make sure that we had assets to take care of our sisters, the life of our sisters long term, and support the work that we were doing, we could have those investments themselves make a difference in the lives of people that we were trying to serve at the grassroots. And so about that time, our previous treasurer had started working with AIM around impact. And I don't know if it was Sister Jane who influenced AIM or if AIM, Ascension Investment Management, influenced Sister Jane. But we started participating in the first impact fund that AIM kicked off back in 2015 or 14? 2014. So we were in the first round. But what impressed me was a statistic that said that 99% of venture capital was going to white men. And I thought, white men are pretty smart, but 99% of the good ideas and 99% of all of the new and emerging business ventures don't all belong to white men. So how can we advance the access to capital for women and minorities, other minorities? And you and I had that conversation several years ago. And I remember the discussion was, how do we, what's most important, Teresa? Do you want the money to go to communities where it's the woman in Africa who needs a microloan? Or do you want it to be a woman-owned business, regardless of who is served? Or do you want female investment managers, people who are managing the funds are female? And I said, yes. I wanted all of it. I wanted access to capital to those who are managing the funds. I wanted access to women who were business owners, and I wanted access to businesses that were going to empower women at the grassroots level. And I think we're now on our fourth impact fund. And we have examples of all of those types of investments in each of those different types of funds, in fund 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we've got investments at the local level, microfinancing and access to pharmaceuticals and healthcare for women. We've got examples of women-owned businesses. We have examples of funds being managed by women. And I attribute that. I can have an idea and I just get to tell Jess and David at Ascension Investment Management, gosh, I sure wish we could do this. And they have been gracious enough to say, well, okay, we'll take that on. We'll try to work with that. So I don't have to go out and find the businesses because they're willing partners and they get as excited as I do, or maybe it's an infectious excitement that Jess has, that we can really make a difference in the lives of women and people living in poverty by the decisions we make with how we invest our funds. Impact is one of the most exciting things. And, you know, I don't get as excited about the other 99% of our investments because it's really negative screening. And the more that we can, I know David Erickson's out there. So Dave, the more successful those investments are, the more we can then assign towards impact investing and we can make the difference. So I do get excited around impact. I don't know if that jumped into a lot of stuff. So I don't know if that was answering your question, but I think we have to be deliberate. The point is to be deliberate because it is not going to happen naturally. Another discussion that we had with AIM around impact was one screen that you had was, we don't want to invest in first-time fund managers because we don't want to take that risk. Mm-hmm. That means that money keeps going to the same people. And if 99% of it is going to white men, that means the next 99% is going to go to white men. So we actually challenged you and you said, okay, we'll find other ways to make sure that we can manage the risk if we take on a first-time manager. So kudos to AIM for being willing to dream with me and then make those dreams a reality. But I think it's just being courageous enough to say we want to make a difference with our investments.
That was amazing. And you encapsulated everything that I think embodies what we want to talk about at this.
I can go back on you.
And I defy anyone to understand, to object, to understand why I find you to be you have been such an inspirational person in my life. And when you get excited, I get excited. Sometimes when I get excited, you get excited. It's been a real honor and pleasure. And it was Sister Jane, when I first started in 2012, and we had these conversations like, okay, when are you going to start using our money to promote a Catholic mission? That was like the first spark of, yes, we can do this. And then when the reins changed over, it was just I just thank you. I thank you for everything you've done. And I have to add one more thing. You talked about the negative, the negative screening. You were very influential in adding one of those negative screens. And I thought maybe you can touch on that, the idea of social justice with climate justice. You and the sisters were a huge advocate of the climate justice and how that transpired. So in just a few minutes, maybe tell that story about the fossil fuel restrictions.
Yeah, that also, I was sparked to think about that at that investment conference in Rome, and Matt Patsky, who's with Trilogy, Trillium Investment Management, was doing a presentation. And yes, there are impact opportunities that we have done around creating access to alternative fuels, solar, wind energy, et cetera. But Matt stood up in front of all these Catholic investors and said, if you are still invested in fossil fuels, all of the good that you're doing through impact investing is of naught. And you really need to challenge yourselves to divest of fossil fuels. So I came back and had that conversation with you and our colleagues at AIM. And I think, Dave's out there. It's okay, Dave. It's going to get better. I promise. The first reaction was, Teresa, you don't want to do that. you don't want to get out of fossil fuels. First of all, we need fossil fuels. There's not enough alternative fuels to power the world. And secondly, if you get out, it's not going to affect the fossil fuel companies. They're still going to be investing, and then you will lose that return, and you will have a negative impact to your investment returns. And so my reaction was, yeah, but then I wouldn't lie awake at night feeling guilty. But our conversation emerged from that. Over the next, it took us 4 years from that initial conversation, for 4 years to continue the dialogue, to say, what are you really trying to accomplish? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't penalize the companies that are trying to bring about the clean solutions that we need, alternative fuels? And some of those companies are companies that are currently involved in fossil fuels. So we continued that conversation and said, we needed to not, this idea of divesting of fossil fuels can't be just a blunt instrument. We're just going to get out of fossil fuels. How do we do it in a way that advances what we're trying to accomplish? So we did craft the language that said, all right, we're going to screen out, and we already had been screening out the really bad companies that were not adhering to the Paris Accord, not adhering to EPA requirements, not providing the appropriate and legally required reporting of their fossil fuel and their energy usage and environmental impact. We evolved from that, just having that simple negative screen, to a little bit more nuanced. We will continue to invest in a company that is on the journey to alternative solutions, that is bringing about the next generation of clean energy. But we will not invest in companies that are going to spend more money marketing their fossil fuel production than they are serious about producing any alternatives. We're also going to continue to be to exclude and screen out companies that continually fail to meet the requirements around EPA, Paris Accord, and environmental reporting. It did take us 4 years to get that. There's still a little bit, because we've got a little bit of exposure in hedge. We've got a little bit of exposure in private equity, and it just takes a little longer to divest. But I think within the next few years, we will have taken out that last little bit of fossil fuel exposure. The other thing that being willing to stay in the dialogue with AIM enabled us to do was come about a set of screens that didn't only work for the Daughters of Charity, but that AIM could offer your other clients, including Ascension, who I think is your largest client. So we had a 40-fold impact by working through a solution that you could offer other clients, not just for us. I don't know if you want to make any comment to that, but I think that while it took us a little while, I believe we achieved far more by working through the nuances.
Well, I just want to thank you for being such an amazing leader, an amazing woman, and for being so inspirational into making these positive changes and being such a great influence on how we manage assets. And so with that, I'm going to transition over to our next speaker. I'm going to transition over to Sarah. So our next speaker is Sarah Smith. Sarah is the director of Mercy Partnership Fund, the global community investment program of Mercy Investment Services. The social responsible she oversees a portfolio that includes below market rate investments to mission-driven organizations working around the globe on projects that provide high social and environmental impact. She has extensive experience successfully managing investments in organizations that deliver social and environmental impact, including in affordable housing, social finance, education, public transit, civic entrepreneurship, and community development. So thank you, Sarah, and welcome. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good. Thank you so much, Jess. And it's fun to be here with the fellow panelists, but also with the terrific attendees. It's great to see the interest in this topic. Also privileged to be able to share some of the pioneering work of the Sisters of Mercy, who've been using their financial resources as a catalyst for change for decades. They've thoughtfully sought for ways to be impactful with their investments, including providing community investments that are aligned with their critical concerns, which include care of the earth, immigration, racism, nonviolence, and concern for women. Just as context for my remarks, I want to give just a little brief background about the Sisters of Mercy and Mercy Investment Services, which is the socially responsible investing program, and spotlight some of the community investments that we've made using a gender lens. The Sisters of Mercy of the Americas are a religious community of Catholic women serving in communities throughout the United States, Central and South America, Guam, Jamaica, Philippines. Caring for the economically poor, especially women and children, has been a hallmark of their work since its founding by Catherine Macaulay in Dublin, Ireland in the 1830s. The ministries today include collaborative efforts in education, healthcare, housing, spiritual care, and social services. And for the Sisters of Mercy, socially responsible investing is also a key ministry. They, along with other women religious communities, were among the pioneers in impact investing, with their journey going back nearly 5 decades. Often, they were a first or an early investor, providing low-interest loans to affordable housing efforts and newly formed community loan funds. They recognized even then that the investment of financial resources was a ministry in of itself. They established Mercy Investment Services as their socially responsible investing program to collectively manage the funds of the congregation and those of many of its ministries. Mercy Partnership Fund is just one part of Mercy Investment Services' socially responsible investing program, which also includes portfolio screens, shareholder advocacy, and proxy voting, in addition to impact investing. Maggie, if I could have the first slide. As the community investing arm, we provide below market rate investments to mission-driven organizations that are using the proceeds on projects that align with one or more of our impact objectives, which include helping to reduce economic poverty for those underserved by traditional financial sources, supporting economic, health, educational opportunities, especially for women, children, immigrants, refugees, and people of color, and protecting the environment. Since the funds we lend are from the pool of funds the sisters have saved for their retirement and their ministries, we need to be paid back, but we have flexibility in the terms that we can provide. Today, our community investments are at work through approximately 60 investee partners whose work is benefiting individuals in 67 countries and in all 50 states. Concern for women is a through line in all our community investment decisions, which are made by a committee that includes both sisters and lay members. When we look at opportunities, we consider, among other factors, the gender diversity of the governing board, management team, staff, and beneficiaries, how concerns for women are incorporated into mission and strategies, and the various stakeholder engagement approaches, and whether the services or products have a positive effect on women and their families, be it through entrepreneurship, affordable housing, health services, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, among others. Let me share a few examples of our community investments that particularly address the needs of women and the role our funds, along with those of others, have played. They include a direct loan to a nonprofit organization, loans to intermediaries such as Community Development Financial Institution and Microfinance Institution. These both historically have been very important sources of capital for female entrepreneurs. And financing for a fund that's been established with both a gender and climate perspectives. If I could have the next slide, please. Keyway Center for Diversion and Reentry is project that was started by two Sisters of Mercy that 25 years ago saw the need to help incarcerated women as they were reentering society. Now, the Keyway Center for Diversion and Reentry provides transitional housing, basic necessities, supportive services for women and trans individuals who are reentering the St. Louis community from jail or prison. 3 years ago, Keyway had an opportunity to purchase a residential building that had formerly been used as a novitiate for use as a safe, substance-free co-living home for justice-involved women. A loan from Mercy Partnership Fund, along with the Religious Communities Impact Fund and the State Mental Health Board, helped Keyway make the purchase and renovations possible, and is now home to 15 women who are supporting one another on their journeys towards recovery. Next slide, please. Our discussions with Michigan Women Forward began a number of years ago as the organization was expanding its entrepreneurship programs for women and girls. As part of that, the organization wanted to grow its small micro lending program, which it was pairing with education and mentorship opportunities. The challenge was to identify flexible capital that would complement the resources that it had available through the Small Business Administration. When a local Sister of Mercy and I visited Michigan Women Forward to learn more about their programs, we were struck by the compelling testimony of several participants about the life-changing support they were receiving through the coaching and peer support activities. We were pleased to be one of the organizations that made an early loan to Michigan Women Forward to help them grow their programs. I think in retrospect that as important as that initial loan was our flexibility and those of others who during the pandemic deferred interest payments so Michigan Women Forward could provide payment flexibility to their borrowers as they work to recover from the pandemic challenges. It's also been very gratifying for us as one of the early investors to see the organization's progress. Significant markers have included Michigan Women Forward becoming a certified CDFI last year, and then just earlier this month, its announcement of the establishment, along with the state, of a $10 million Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund that will lend to women and people of color who don't qualify for traditional loans through banks and credit unions. Next slide. For the past 8 years, we've supported the work of Friendship Bridge, a nonprofit social enterprise working in Guatemala, a country that suffers some of the worst rates of poverty, inequality, and child malnutrition. Through its microcredit and various support programs like financial education and preventive health services, Friendship Bridge works with more than 30,000 Guatemalan women each year, the majority of whom are indigenous and live in rural areas of the country. Our loan to Friendship Bridge is pooled with those of others to enable them to use its group lending model to make loans to women who start or expand their businesses. And finally, the next slide. The fourth example is an investment in a new Impact First fund that was designed specifically to create economic opportunities, especially in sectors that address climate change and that benefit women and youth. Just launched at the end of last month, the West Africa Bright Futures Fund is focusing its work in 4 fragile West African countries. The fund will provide growth capital for small and medium enterprises and microfinance institutions, and is using both a gender lens and climate lens as it identifies opportunities for investment. Mercy is one of a handful of investors supporting this new 5-year fund with the hope that it will enable the organization to grow its work in sub-Saharan Africa while creating opportunities for women and youth and combating climate change. And just as in closing, the work that we are doing today in impact investing is still very much connected to the work of our foundress, Catherine McCauley, who used her financial resources in the 1800s to address the unmet needs of those forgotten by society, particularly women. Thanks to her legacy and vision and the wisdom and the sustained commitment of the sisters who have followed, we've been able to continue making impactful investments and addressing the needs of today, which include those of women around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really, really appreciate those comments. I am unmuted, right? Yeah. Sorry. So I'm happy to introduce our last speaker, Sonia Cole. Sonia is president of Zevin Asset Management, a majority women-owned and led manager in Boston. She started her career in Scotland as a traditional equity analyst and portfolio manager for a very large institutional asset manager. Increasingly disillusioned by the greed in the industry, she transitioned to more impactful investing in 2007, building out Zevin's shareholder advocacy program before becoming the firm's president nearly a decade ago. Sonia also serves on the board of ICCR, the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. So welcome, Sonia, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. And I'm excited to be here among friends and speaking to the original impact investors, the Catholic Sisters. So just a few words on Zevin so you can place me. So we've been helping faith investors, nonprofits, and individuals grow their assets while seeking justice, equality, and a healthy planet. And we've been doing that for over 25 years. We're a B Corp, and we manage global multi-asset and public equity strategies and use our voice as investors to contribute to social and environmental change through the behavior of large public companies. And as Jessica mentioned, very unusual for an investment firm. We're a majority women-owned and led, with half our staff being women and half people of color. So I hope I have something to contribute to the conversation today. When I first started in the investment industry as an equity analyst nearly 25 years ago, usually I was the only woman in the room with dozens of men. There weren't a lot of role models, and I certainly didn't see myself as the CEO of an investment firm. It's been an interesting journey of succession to this leadership position. I took over from our much older male founder who had a very different style of management. You may remember him, Robert Zevin. He was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. But in general, I found that female leaders have a gentler, more empathetic style of interacting with colleagues. Rather than dictating their views from on high, they bring staff into discussions, which I think results in better decision-making over time. But I also will say that from time to time, this can have an unsettling effect on staff as they learn to navigate those behavioral differences in leadership style. But I'm firmly of the mindset that a less hierarchical form of leadership at the end of the day leads to better results. In financial services, historically, it has not been a safe place for women or people of color, but in select areas like in impact investing, it has been a bit better. For the last few decades, our movement was made up of mostly women. I don't know if it was cause and effect, but it was a very sharing type of environment where competitors worked closely together with that shared goal of having impact. But now the gender balance is starting to look more like the traditional investment industry, where only 20% of professionals are women. And I think that's to its detriment because the emphasis is much more on sales and impact washing than on true social change. What we see is we have a lot of these branded so-called gender lens strategies out there, and what they're doing is framing women as an economic instrument. And I think that can lead to a reliance on counting women rather than value them. And I hope today we can get you to think about how we can get beyond diversity and think about inclusion, especially in the public space, because they're very different things. That being said, I think that looking at gender can't happen in a vacuum. Gender patterns are complicated by race, by class, by ethnicity, caste, and other identities along which power and discrimination operate. We see a complex interplay between race and gender, especially, and then on other issues such as environment or worker health. And I think all of these things should be looked at together to get the most information as an investor. and when making investment decisions, and then when changing corporate behavior, rather than just looking at gender in a vacuum. So investing to promote gender equality and to advance the socioeconomic standing of women is a priority for Zevin, but it's not going to happen by having a few more white women on the boards of S&P 500 companies. So I'll just share one slide to show you how we use a gender lens in our investment process. So, we think that having a more diverse and equitable and inclusive workforce will help us capitalize on market opportunities, help with innovation, and improve our resiliency. And we hope to see evidence of a similar attitude in the companies in which we invest. So, for example, when we make decisions about whether to make an investment in a company, one of the things that we look at is pay equity. Pay gaps are typically driven by discrimination, either implicit or explicit. So the first step is for companies to own that and then do something about it. We're also really interested in the hiring and retention of women and other diverse groups, reporting and then setting goals on it. Typically women will enter a firm at the same level as men, but then drop out as they get more and more senior. And then there's the role of mandatory arbitration and allowing workplace harassment to persist. As investors, we think that's a pretty interesting data point, and we're trying to track which companies are using those clauses so we can ask them to stop. And then moving on to examples where we think we've had some impact through shareholder advocacy, for example, on paid sick leave. So on the surface, paid sick leave, maybe it may not seem like a gender issue, but like many things it is. For better or for worse, women are the primary caretakers in most families. So when people get sick with COVID or with something else and they need care, paid leave is a huge issue. So instead of women having to leave their jobs to care for themselves or for the people around them, and then the company having to find and train someone else, it makes a lot of financial sense to keep them on, as well as it being the right thing to do. So we're a part of a large coalition of investors through ICCR, pushing retailers whose staff are largely made up of women on this. And we led the charge at Kroger and at Home Depot, where our shareholder proposals helped the company make permanent their more generous temporary paid sick leave policies during COVID. And the last example I want to give is paid family leave. So the statistics are pretty atrocious. Almost 90% of private sector workers in the US don't have access to a single day of paid family leave. And that number is even higher for low wage workers. And 1 in 4 new mothers returns to work just 10 days after giving birth because they can't afford to stay home or just aren't allowed to. So paid family leave promotes gender, racial, and socioeconomic equity. It helps women earn higher wages instead of dropping out of the workforce. So we worked with a nonprofit, Paid Leave USA, to identify companies in our portfolios with poor family leave practices. And we got a number of them, Starbucks, CVS, Home Depot, and TJX, to meaningfully improve their family leave policies for their lowest paid workers. So we're pretty proud of that as well. So this work is pretty different than what the previous workers talked about. It's on the public equity side, but we think that there is impact to be made on the gender side of things in public companies. And they have such huge social footprints that getting them to change does have a big difference. It does make a big difference.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you for those words. And I have to say that I started my career about 20 years ago as an equity analyst, and I appreciate the sea of men that I worked among. And I was blessed to have a portfolio manager that was a woman. And I got to the benefits that I had to see someone in power as a woman have a voice to help me pave that way. And so I just thank you for paving your own path and becoming a woman of leadership and can represent how much can be achieved and all the good that can be done. So we're going to transition to Q&A, and I encourage anyone to use the chat window to type in a question. I'm watching that. Sonia, since I ended with you, I thought I'd just quickly continue our conversation just a little bit more and ask you one follow-up question. Women continue to be underrepresented in the fund and asset management field, as we both know. A report from 2021 reveals that only 14% of fund managers are female, and diverse-owned firms manage less than 1.5% of assets in the US. What I want to ask is, what role can Catholic investors play in closing these gaps? What resources can you recommend in looking for and identifying asset managers that are majority diverse owned and or showing progress in advancing diversity? And that is a mouthful and a long question, but I know you will have resources that you can share for us.
Yeah, it's absolutely astounding. There's been so much chatter over the years about efforts to increase the ranks of women in fund management, but there's been absolutely no progress in the last 2 decades. So I think it's important for asset owners to have a good hard look at who's on their investment committee, as well as who's managing the money and who owns the firms they're investing with. What does your manager look like? Who owns the firm? Pretty much always white men. Who does the investing at your manager? White men. There's a theme there. And to me, it seems ridiculous to have such a concentration of decision-making in the hands of a very narrow subset of the population who are homogenous in terms of gender, race, age, class, and cultural experience. So it's just not a good diversification strategy. You may think you're diversified by investing in international stocks, small cap, private equity, real estate, but unless you've really focused on diversifying the managers in your portfolio, all of them probably come from the same backgrounds, come from the same schools, and think in similar ways. So I think it is time to diversify, and I think it's really prudent to do that from a financial consideration. So I would also say there's a lot of studies that show that at a minimum, there's no statistical difference in performance between diverse-owned firms and their peers. And some studies actually show better performance from diverse firms. Yes, there's this stubborn reluctance to hire diverse managers, and I'll put a link with some more information in the chat on that. And there's this argument to be made that the due diligence process itself exacerbates existing inequities in investing, and that asset owners and allocators are going to have to adjust their processes to achieve the results they say they want. So there's another website I'm going to put in the chat that has some pointers about how to do that. And then finally, in terms of references and where to go to find these diverse managers, there's a publication called Emerging Managers Monthly that has a database of diverse managers that can be a good starting point. So lots of food for thought there.
Okay, thank you so much. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, if that's okay. According to the World Bank, women represent the majority of unbanked adults globally, and increasing access to financial services for women can support inclusion and serves as a growing business opportunity as well. Can you speak about Mercy's approach to supporting the economic empowerment of women globally through its investment program?
Sure. We've been very deliberate to try to identify partners globally that both have a good reach, but also have the boots on the ground to really be listening to the needs of the women and working closely with them. So working through networks of microfinance institutions has been a very helpful strategy for us. In addition to that, are working with social enterprises that in addition to working with MFIs, are also working with small and medium enterprises that are really a great generator for jobs for women. So that's been another approach that we've continued to look at. Domestically, in addition to CDFIs, we continue to be a big fan of community development credit unions and banks. And our impact deposits are helping to fuel the resources they have to support community members, including women. And more CDFIs include specific business advisory support programs for women. So that's a great trend that we appreciate seeing when we look at making decisions of those to make investments with.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This would go out to the group. Resources. Are we missing things that, that you're lacking to make you better investors, to make you more aware? Are things that, as we as constituents, like listening to you speak, there's things that you can encourage that, we can do better as asset managers? Sister Teresa, anything that AIM can be doing better that you think? We always take that.
Do you hate it when you do that? I think that AIM has, with our investment committee, has enabled us to be proactively thinking about what is the next evolution, what's the next thing that we can do, and not just keep patting ourselves on the back for what we've already done. I think I appreciate Sonia's comments. Whenever I hear wise people talking about what needs to be done within our investing, with our investment strategies, I can bring that back. I know I can bring that back and continue the dialogue with Jessica and the folks at AIM. And I think you are also hearing it too, Jess. We continue to be exposed to the things that we need to be thinking about. I appreciate that. The more information is available, the better our decisions can be, and the more deliberate we can be about what we're doing. And a lot of this type of information, with the role of women in the investment industry, if you will, and the access to capital, and the way that women are accessing resources at the local level, the more information we have, the better we can be. So getting that information out there, publishing it, posting it, that's this kind of a dialogue, this kind of a forum, the forum that CIIC offers is what's going to help us make greater change going forward. I don't have a very specific answer. I just think it's continuing to ask the question and not assume we're done and nothing can be done, because it's going to change.
I appreciate
I just
that.
want to amplify on that and continue the shout out to CIIC and others like Faith Invest and Gin and the Francesco Collaborative, who are not only providing resources, but are providing platforms for those of us to network with each other and really value the lessons learned that are being shared through those various dialogues and organizations.
I can put in a few more links to different reports by Tides or Criterion or Gender Smart Investing, for more information.
And I agree. I think never ending the conversation, thinking things are done. I just can't agree with this group more that keep your voice loud. Don't be afraid to pave a path and put people's feet to the fire. It certainly has always worked for me, and I've certainly not been shy to do it to someone else when I want to see something happen. I'd really like to, I guess do we have time for one more question, Maggie? Yeah, okay. I see one question coming in. How do I find those firms you've mentioned that will work with individual investors? Any thoughts on that question? How do you find the firms?
I'd like to ask that question too, because it is hard for an individual, especially somebody who doesn't have the $40 million to invest. It is easier for a very well-off individual to find a fund manager. It's not as easy for someone who has a few $100,000 that they want to invest, or for the person whose 403B investment or pension. How do they know how to direct their funding? So I just want to weigh in. I'd like to know the answer to that too. Somebody's got Calvert. They did put Calvert out there. Calvert does allow for individual investors.
I will say Oh, I'm sorry, Sonia, I don't want to interrupt you. You're,
Yeah, so we recently became part of a new platform called Empower, EMPWR, and it's a platform started by a woman portfolio manager, and she's highlighting the skills of other women portfolio managers. So she's launched, I think, 5 or 6 ETFs, all led by women. Zevon's global equity strategy is one of them. But it's a cool way to kind of show what women can do in the money management space. They're not all gender lens strategies, but they're all run by women, and they're ETFs with really low minimums.
and I would add, I mean, as the voices are strong, investors that demand things, managers will come. I mean, and advisors will be forced to look for diverse management companies, women-owned management companies. I think the challenge now has become, as money goes to it and the opportunity presents itself, is to really understand who's well-intentioned, who's there for the right reason, making sure that it isn't just there to capture the next management fee, but that they're doing what they say they're going to do. They're investing who they're going to say they're going to invest in. So that requires the due diligence. But if the demand is there, it will come. So we have to use our voices and we have to demand it. With that, I think we're running out of time, Maggie. So I love this conversation. I love you women so much. More of us are needed. I'm going to transition it back to Maggie so she can wrap us up.
I want to just take a moment to say thank you, if you can still hear me. There are some men that are participating in today's session or listening in, and I want to thank them for joining us, because a lot of times I feel like it's women promoting women, but when our male counterparts help get in the cause with us, then I think that's when we're gonna see the greatest amount of change. Unfortunately, it's gonna take them helping to support us to make it happen. So Dave, John, others that are out there, thank you so much.
Yeah, I definitely echo that sentiment. We can't do it alone. We need everybody on board, and the more power in numbers. So yeah, with that, I do want to thank everybody who's joined today, specifically to Jessica for facilitating the conversation. And we're so grateful for each of our speakers that you heard from, Sister Teresa George, Sarah Smith, and Sonia Kowal, for sharing their really valuable insights on this topic and furthering the important work they do. I also want to thank the Participation and Outreach Committee at CIIC, who was instrumental in planning this webinar. If you are an impact investor, already aligning your assets with your mission, please do get in touch with us. We'd be happy to share more detailed information about the Catholic Impact Investing Pledge or CIIC's membership program. One last thing before we fully wrap up before the hour, if you do have 2 minutes and would like to share your feedback about this forum and other CIIC events, there's going to be a feedback form that will pop up in your browser at the conclusion of the webinar. Take some time to share your thoughts about today's event. With that, we will also be sharing the recording and some of the resources. There were a lot of resources in the chat, so I will be sure to summarize those and share with all that attended and registered for today's event. But I just want to thank everybody again for joining this really important conversation for Women's Month, and want to wish everybody a really happy Wednesday. Thanks again, all.